All right, how's it going, everybody? So in this video, we're going to be, or this series rather, we're going to be talking about creating C++ projects and developing a player character, getting interactables working with interfaces, stuff like that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and click launch on 5.5.1. All right, once that opens up, let's click game, blank. I'm going to choose C++ and give it a name. Like so. Starter content off. I'm going to have my quality preset to maximum, and then you want to do your project location as well. Click create, and we'll wait for that to generate. All right, now that that's created, let's do a few kind of standard housekeeping things first. Go to new level, basic, click create. I'm going to just move this floor just a little bit, and then right click on the content, new folder, map, and then I want to control shift S, and we're going to save our map here, test environment, and then let's go up to edit project settings, maps and modes, and we're going to change this to that map we just created. All right, so now content, right click, new folder, inputs, and then right click again, input, mapping context, and we're going to call this MC underscore player inputs. Right click again, input, input action, IA movement. We want to open that up and choose a vector 2D. And then we can duplicate that with Control D, IA look, and now create a new input action, IA interact, and IA jump. Okay. So now let's open up our MC, open mappings. Let's choose movement, W, S, A, D. For W, we want to swizzle the input axis values. Useful if a map 1D input onto the y-axis of a 2D action. So basically, because I'm using the same input for forward and backwards, it's going to be one add movement input. Or I'm sorry, one input event that's going to be handling both of these. So we're going to use those. And then on the S, I also want to negate this. Okay. And then A, because A is left, we have to negate that as well. Mappings, look, and this is going to be mouse XY 2D axis. Click the drop down. Let's negate this. And we just want to negate the y-axis so we don't have inverted like flight controls. And we're going to do interact. That's easy, it's just left mouse button. And then we'll do jump and spacebar. Okay. All right, so that's all set up. Now I want to create all the classes that we're going to need. Okay, so the first one is going to be a player controller. Next, I'm going to make that public and say CPP, like that, hit add, and let that generate add to the project. It's going to pop up in Visual Studio. Just click reload all. All right, so that's successful. As we could see in the live coding here, successful. So now, in here, let's right click, new C++ class, character. Like that. All right, the character's there. But it looks like we have encountered an issue. We must recompile before module before it would appear in a content browser. I feel like, no. All right, so what we're going to do here, we're going to close out the editor and then give it a second to make sure that live coding closes. We're going to right click and click build in C++ tutorial. Let's wait for that to finish up. Built successfully, so now we can open the Unreal Engine project back up. Sometimes this happens. All right, so now let's right click again, new C++ class, and I'm going to create a game mode. Let's do CPP game mode, hit enter, and let that process. All right, and C++ class, let's go all classes, object, next. I'm going to call this let's just do interface. I'll keep the same naming convention, CPP underscore interface, create class. All right, and one more here. We want to do an actor class next, and this is going to be CPP interactable master, create class. All right, so now let's start setting up our player controller class. Go over to our header file here, and what we want to do first and foremost is set up our constructor. We're not necessarily going to be using our constructor, but it's good to have set up here. So now I want a protected, and this is where all of our begin play is going to be, all of our input mapping, stuff like that. All right. So I want to set up a U property. And this one is going to be edit defaults only. That way it shows up in our details panel, so we can set the variables to a value, but we don't necessarily have any other access to it. Read only simply means that it's going to be read only. We're not going to be able to edit any specific values in there. And then we want to put it inside of a category, input. Oops. All right, so this is going to be U input mapping context. And we're going to call this player input context. Okay, so you'll notice that it's not detecting it, and that's because we haven't included the things that we need to include in here. So up here, I'm just going to paste those in. So we need enhanced input component and enhanced input subsystems.h. Okay, so now you can see that that is recognizing it. Now we want another U property there, and this one is going to be U input action, move action, just like that. Okay, so we want to set that up for our look action, our jump action, and our interact. Okay. Next, I want to handle the actual inputs in the player controller, and the reason I'm doing this is so we can possess the player, whatever player character we possess, we will be able to control that particular pawn, right? So let's do a public here. We want to set up our input component. Override down. And then I think I want to set up a we'll do this for now. I might change this later, but I want to set up a reference to my player character so I can have this particular instance that we are controlling. So let's do cpp dot underscore player character like that. And then on here, I'm going to create a variable of that type. Okay. So a like that. Like that. Okay. So now I have a direct reference to my player character, so I can cast and set this variable to a value, and then I'll have that value, right? So now let's do private, and this is going to be where all of my movement functions will be. Okay. We need to pass in a reference to the action value from our enhanced input, which is F input action value. Okay. So look, jump, interact. Okay. So that's all we need right now. Let's hop over to our C++ file. Okay. Oh, actually, you know what? Let's create definitions for these. So I have my constructor. I'll have my begin play. I'll have my setup input component. And I'm holding control and hitting period. And I can create the definition of each function. Okay. So now you can see kind of I'm putting them in order here, so I can access these. And basically that cast I'm going to do, referencing the player character, is just for the jump functionality. Like I said, we might change that so we're not referencing that at all. So nothing needs to be here yet. However, in begin play, we need a super declaration. And then I want to set our player character variable. So here we have cast ACP player character, and then we're getting the character of this. So we're setting this reference variable here. Now I want to check to see if the player controller is valid. And if it is valid, we're going to add our input mapping context. So let's do CPP player controller. And let's give it a temporary variable here. Cast a player controller. And we're going to be referencing this. Okay. All right. So now, oh, you know what? I have to include the input system and the subsystem here. So I can if I could type like that, just call our variable subsystem, get the local player, and that's what we want to do right there. However, but these are incorrect. We're not going to do these. So now what we want to do is make sure that our input context is good. And then we want to get our subsystem, add mapping context, like that. Okay. So basically, I'm just casting to my player character, so I have a reference here. This is for later. You don't necessarily even have to have this here if you don't want to. And then here, I'm casting to the player controller just to make sure it's valid. And then I'm getting the local player subsystem, setting this subsystem to our local player reference. And then I'm setting the input mapping context. So it's using our actual input mapping. And then I also need the context options to be 0. Right. All right, so right down here, we want you know, all that looks pretty good. Except we're not using IE. Our enhanced input, actually, no, this isn't correct. My apologies. We want to do a few checks in here as well. Let's see. Actually, we don't even necessarily have to do a check for that right yet. What we can do is a player controller like so. Then okay, so now we can determine if our input events are set up properly. This, of course, is not the correct way of calling that. It's GitHub Copilot. It doesn't do the right stuff sometimes. So we want to bind action, but we're using enhanced input. So it's a little bit different on what we need to pass through. So it should look something like this, right? And then we have our look action, which is the same deal. Jump action, interact. Okay. So this should be calling that. Okay, so if, and we're missing a bracket. Like that. Okay. So if brackets, if bracket, 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 and then we have it all encapsulated like that. Okay. So basically what we're saying is we're grabbing our subsystem here. We're binding the action, the move action, triggered. We're referencing this player controller, and then we're calling the function when this action is executed, right? However, jump action, I don't want this to be triggered. I want it to be started. And same thing right here. I want it to be started. So now for move, because we're using the same input event, but calling both axes, so we're moving forward and moving right off of the same function, we need to first set up a movement vector. What's that value? Get f vector to be that. Okay, so now let's get a reference to the control pawn. A pawn controlled pawn equals get pawn, like that. Alright, so now we need an F rotator. Camera rotation. And we'll we don't need to do that. We could just get control rotation here. And basically, right now, we're just trying to eliminate the pitch from the values, so we don't have to worry about that when we're passing these into our add movement inputs. Okay. Equals F rotation matrix. Yaw rotation. Let's do that for that. And let's get right direction as well. Okay. So now we can do controlled pawn, add movement input, controlled pawn, add movement input. Oh, controller pawn. That's not right. D. Okay. So there's our movement, right? So we're getting the camera's rotation. We're getting the yaw rotation and eliminating the pitch from that. And then we're getting the axes for our forward vector and our right vector. Okay. Nothing too shabby. And then we're adding the movement input based on that information. Look is a little bit easier. Right here, we're creating a local F vector, look axis vector, and we're getting the vector 2D from our value here that we're passing through the input action. And then we're getting a reference to our controlled pawn again, add yaw input, and add pitch input for our camera looking. Okay. All right, so now we're going to stop there, and let's go ahead and set up our character. This is pretty simple. We don't need event tick or our input there. However, we do want to do a U property. Edit defaults only, but I don't want this to be input. I want it to be camera. And this is going to be U camera component, camera component like that. I need to include camera component header file, so it has a reference in there. And then inside of our character, we're going to initialize down, set up attachment, the root component, and we're going to set yaw controller rotation to true. This is incorrect right here. We don't want to do this like this. We just want to say root component here. Okay. And we also no longer need these two because we've removed those. So that's all we need to do in our player character. That's all set. Player controller's good. Like that. All right. So let's hop back into Unreal and we're going to compile real quick. Excellent. So now what I want to do, go into content. I'm going to make a new folder, player, and another new folder, call it mode. Right. Go in here. I want to grab my game mode, create blueprint class, put it in mode, and create that. And then in here, I want to right click my player character, like that. And I want to do the same thing with my player controller. Create. Right. So now we have blueprints for all of these. pop them up here. Get rid of you. All right, so now you can see we have our input values. So we can just pop these right in. Look, jump, and interact. For our player character, you can see we already have our camera set up, so that's good. And then our game mode, we want to set the player character and the controller. And now in here, let's set the game mode. Double check it. Yeah, player controller didn't set, so let's set that again. Now we can hit play, and we can move around. Oh, my input values are backwards at the moment. So let's fix that. Ah, yes, right here. So this should be Y, and this should be X. Okay. Now we can hop back in Unreal, compile again. Alright, so that's good to go. Let's hit play. And now our controls are good to go. Look at that. Mouse movement, WASD works. Alright, so now let's hop back over. And let's set up our jump. Jump is oh, that can't work, can it? No, because jump is a character function, not a pawn function. So now we can do that. So basically I'm checking to see if the player character variable is valid. If it is, jump. Okay. Like I said, we'll fix that in a little bit, so we're not directly referencing the actual player character class, but a just general character class. All right, so our interact, let's create a start vector. Want to get the camera components location. We're going to do an end, which is going to be the start plus the camera components forward vector times 1000, which means it's going to be 1000 units ahead of the player. We're going to do our hit result, collision params, ignore the player character class. Good. And now we want to do our actual line trace. So this code is actually incorrect, so I'm going to get rid of that. We're not ready for that yet. However, I do want to do a check to see if I am hitting an actor. And if I am, let's do a G engine add-on screen debug message. And we're going to be returning hit actor and then the actual name of the actor we hit. Okay. But before we move on to anywhere, let's take a look at our interface class here. A few things we need to change in here. So here we want UObject interface. This needs to be a U interface, all capitals, minimal API. This needs to be a U interface here. And then we're good to go there. Oh, no, we're not. We also need to remove this guy. Okay. And now we want to do another generated body. And this is deriving from our actual project class and passing through ICPP interface. And this guy. Yeah, no, that's right. All right, so now we want a public. This will be a virtual void interact like that, just so we can override this later. And because it's not a pure function or anything, we need to pass through to the C++ class, but leave this blank. Okay. All right, so now in our interactable master, we need to include our interface class, public ICPP interface right here. And then down here, we're going to virtual void interact override. Okay. So this is overriding the function that's inside of our interface. So now if we implement this guy like this, we're going to pass through a debug message here. Go back to our player controller. And in here, we want to say, oh, we also need to include our interface up here. Like that. Okay. So now down here, inside of our if statement, we're going to say if ICPP interface cast ICPP interface. No. Like that. Like that. Okay. So we're casting to the interface, and then we're calling interface, and we're calling that function. So interface is just our local variable reference to this class type, and then we're calling the interact function there. Okay. So now what you should see is, let's write item interact. Oh, one more thing. One thing we forgot to do. We need a static mesh. Mesh component. And then we need to initialize set component. Why aren't you? What are you doing? Oh, there we go. Like that. All right. So now, hop back into our Unreal and compile. All right. Beautiful. So now, interactables, create a blueprint. Put it in just content folder, I guess. Grab my mesh component, and I'm going to add a cube. Wrong cube. This one. And let's drop that into the level. Press play. So now when I left click, you see hit actor floor. When I click that, item interact. You can see it right there. So our interface is being called, which is pretty darn cool. We could also change that text to blue so we can really see it. And inside of our controller, let's get rid of this. But I want to do a debug line. Just so we could see kind of when we hit and interact and stuff. But if you want to include this interface into any other objects, you now no longer have to cast every time, right? You're just casting to this interface. So other objects you want to include this, just make sure you include the header file, include the module, and then virtual void and override the function that you want to call, and then implement that function. Then whatever you put in here is going to get called when you interact with it, right? So now if we compile one more time, you see in blue, item interact, and I have a debug trace now. I have a line. So you can see I'm able to interact. So this can work with anything, right? just as long as you include a header, include the module, the function, and then implement the function, right? But you can, add to the player score here. You can do all sorts of stuff. And what's really cool is you can do like pass functions that return a value. So it'll return, the item name, and you can pass that into the controller from here, right? So you can get that value and paste it in here from the player without actually directly referencing anything. So yeah, we'll talk about that in the next video. This one's pretty long enough, but yeah, hope you like it. Thanks.